Yeah, Aangwaamiis, has lots of definitions. If you're waiting for somebody and they show up late, you can just say Aangwaamiis, like finally. Or when you say Aangwaamiis in, you're telling people to travel safely. Be careful wherever you go. Aangwaamiis in. So there's many different pronunciations also. Aangwaamiis, Aangwaamiis, Aangwaamiis in, Aangwaamiis in. Yeah? And those are the different dialects. Um, so it has lots of meaning. Finally is a good one. Yeah, finally, it's finally happening. Or finally, you finally arrived on Guam.
The Red Lake Nation is our homeland. In geography, it is the largest Ojibwe place in the United States or Canada completely owned by its original people. When the United States and the state of Minnesota were expanding their territory, our ancestors worked against great odds to maintain our political and cultural sovereignty and our way of life. As late as the 1920s, the federal government still planned to allot the Red Lake Reservation, following a devastating policy that had dispossessed other Indians and enriched the United States. Our leaders steadfastly refused to allot the reservation, insisted on communal landholding, and we, their descendants, are the beneficiaries of their sacrifice and efforts. Red Lake is still Ojibwe country, our homeland. An interesting political leader emerged at Red Lake in these years, Peter Graves. Born at Red Lake but educated in Philadelphia, Graves went to Washington with the 1899 Red Lake delegation, where he also served as interpreter. In 1918, he was part of a committee that would write our first Constitution, and later served as Secretary-Treasurer from 1920 until his death in 1957. He was the unofficial chairman long before the title existed at Red Lake. Professor John Barrows teaches classes on constitutionalism in the law school at the University of Minnesota. An Ojibwe of the Nawash First Nation in Ontario, he is a leading scholar of Indigenous and constitutional law. Barrows points out to students that nations all over the globe have constitutions, including Indigenous nations, and that it is useful to think of constitutions much like the headwaters of a river. If a healthy ecosystem is in place at the headwaters, then everything works well downstream. However, because of political and societal change, constitutions can be revised.
Times change, and the constitutions that have often been drafted in tribal communities were done with the federal government very strongly in mind. Now I know Red Lake here has tried to resist the federal government all along, but nevertheless there were concepts that crept into the way of organization that might not have been Anishinaabe people's first choice. And so a reason for revising a constitution is to make it more consistent with the values and the goals and the aspirations and the objectives of the people in today's world.
The last time a committee at Red Lake revised our Constitution was in 1958. Tom Kane Jr. is a member of the current Constitutional Reform Initiative at Red Lake, following in the footsteps of his father, who was a member of the 1958 committee and a Panema representative. Kane recalled his father talking for hours at a time with district residents and other Red Lake people in the Ojibwe language.
I remember him saying Aangwaamiis, and meaning it's time, after, talking, for hours and hours and hours with some of our chiefs and sub-chiefs. And that would be the main word that he would he would come and say as we're driving away.
As a 5-year-old boy, Kane often tagged along with his father during home visits, stopping at nearly every household in the Panema district to discuss constitutional issues.
It was like it was the highlight of his life. So he had many visitors come to his house to talk politics. Roger Jourdain was one. I remember Steve Kobenes coming. He would come, that's Stephanie's dad, come in his grader. Of course, Roger had been working on the road too, and he would come with his grader and come to visit my dad in Panema when we lived in Panema. And they'd be talking politics for hours and hours. And sometimes very fluent Ojibwe, back and forth. And, you know, it was hard for me to follow what they were saying. But when it came to when they would be laughing, then, of course, I would laugh too. So I just thought it was funny how they would talk politics in Ojibwe. It was fascinating to listen to.
Assisted by a grant from the Bush Foundation, a new independent committee was formed, apart from the current tribal council. Composed of a dozen Red Lake citizens representing each of the reservation districts, as well as the urban areas of Minneapolis and Duluth, the Constitutional Reform Initiative Committee began meeting in 2013. Our historic mission is to study the early Red Lake constitutions, learn more about constitutionalism, engage our fellow citizens on issues important to them, and eventually to draft a new constitution for a tribal referendum. Aangwaamiis, it's time.